So I will slowly start. So as you've just heard, this webinar will be recorded. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this discussion on water and climate change in Iraq and the opportunities for transboundary collaboration with Turkey. So today's webinar is organized by the Subreseau MENA, which is the thematic network on water from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, which focus on the MENA region. So if you would like to become a member, you can sign up on the link that I will just share in a few seconds. And the recording and the PowerPoint, they will be available after the webinar, also on the link. So I put everything in the chat box for you here. And if you have any technical issue, if you don't hear us well, don't hesitate to contact my colleague, Martin Lang. So you see his email here. So here is the agenda for today's exchange. So we will start the discussion with a presentation from Dr. Azzam Alwash, who is the personal advisor to the President of Iraq on climate change. He will give an overview of the water situation in Iraq, share some opportunities that he sees for transboundary cooperation, and you will then be able to ask your question and share your ideas. You should all be able to use the chat box to share your question with all the panelists and the other attendees. And very, very briefly before we start, I just would like to thank Patrice Moi, who is the team leader for SDC in North Syria, who came up with the idea for this webinar and helped to organize it. Also with my colleague Martin Lang, who is ensuring now the technical support, and of course with Dr. Azzam Alwash for his presentation. So now just to make sure that everyone is awake and able to use the chat box, I just would like to ask you to think about one question. So one word that comes to your mind when you hear the word opportunities in the context of water and climate change in Iraq. So just take 30 seconds to think about it. You write in the chat box, you wait before sending it. So I give you 20 more seconds. So one word that comes to your mind thinking about opportunities related to water and climate change in Iraq. And then now you can press send and we should see all your answers. Okay, so with that in mind, collaboration, conservation, peace building, I let you go through the different answers. I will stop sharing my screen and hand over to Dr. Azzam Alwash for his presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to, I would say, like-minded people, given the answers that I just saw. Just one correction to your introduction. I am no longer the advisor to the president because the president is no longer president. We have a new president and I am advisor to Barham Saleh. I remain in that position, advising him on climate change as we look forward to the next stages of what happens in Iraq. Now, let me do share screen here, sharing screen, and start screen broadcast. Start broadcast, here we go. And let's see, keynote, here we go. Well, since you're all familiar with Iraq, I don't need to explain to you where Iraq is and what we are, but I need to remind you all that the reason Iraq is, or Iraq's contribution to the world is irrigated agriculture. And irrigated agriculture was possible and sustainable for thousands of years, simply because, in fact, we had annual floods that come in the spring as the snow melts in the mountains that contribute the water of the Tigris and Euphrates. Without that flood, southern Iraq would have become a saline desert in a few years. What happens was when you irrigate the land using flood irrigation is that the water evaporates, and as a result, we have sabkha or salt, which is a Sumerian expression that is today used in geology to describe salt impregnated soils. This flood that comes in annually washes away the salt and deposits a layer of silt and clay on the farmlands, renewing the vitality of the farmlands. The Sumerians understood intrinsically the value of these floods because they in fact celebrated the goddess of fertility Ishtar. This is This is a hydrograph of the Euphrates River that shows you the pulse of flood. This is 1920 to 2010. You can see that annual pulse coming in until about 1975. In 1975, we had 2 dams be put online on the Euphrates, Kiban Dam in Turkey, and then the Tabaqa Dam in Syria. And so in 1975, we had a drought, we had no floods. And then the flood came back, but the floods are weak. And then starting in the 1990s, the floods have are no longer occurring because of the fact that dams are being built on the headwaters of the Euphrates in Turkey. The same story happens for the Tigris. This is the Tigris in Kut, and you can see a similar story. That pulse of flood, that drumbeat that drove life and biodiversity of the marshes of southern Iraq became suddenly a dead line. It's sort of like the heartbeat is dying slowly, and now it is dead. Today, Iraq is 43 million people. And it is expected that we will be about 50 million people in 2030, or 52 million. And by 2050, we will be well on our way to 80 million if we continue at the same rate. Majority of those Iraqis are, by the way, young, and over 70% are below the age of 30 at this point in time. And by the year 2030, they will be a lot more than that as my generation dies off. Temperatures are increasing. And those of you who have the privilege of having gone to Iraq and understand and see that the dust storms that used to occur only in April are now happening all year round. Our oil income is barely keeping up with the demand on government services. And as the world pushes away from the oil, yes, Iraq will continue to produce oil because it is one of the cheapest places on earth to produce oil. But we are going to have to double and triple the outflow of oil. Of course, that's not possible. So we have 3 perfect storms hitting us: increased population, changes from climate change, increased from climate change, reduction of water. So we are in fact facing a water bankruptcy and financial bankruptcy. And in fact, we don't need to wait till 2030. This is a picture that I took, I think 2 months ago, from the marshes that have been flooded. It is now dry simply because Turkey is now filling Eliso Dam, and there is not enough water for Iraq. In fact, the Ministry of Water Resources and the Ministry of Agriculture indicated that there will be no farming this summer. There will be only enough farming to sustain the seed bank. So the problems are already starting. By the way, this in front of you is actually a sewage outlet from the city of Jubail, keeping just a small portion of the marshes green. In addition to what I have just stated regarding the negative effects of climate change, this is a scenario, a medium-sized scenario that shows what's going to happen when the seawater rises by 3 meters. Southern Iraq will suddenly be a seawater estuary. The city of Basra is located in the middle of that, and of course that means loss of migration. These are pictures of the sandstorms of just last year. So what do we do? Now, those of you who have been watching the discussion between Iraq and Syria and Turkey know that in fact the discussion has been about whose water this is. Iraq claims that they have clay tablets that prove that in fact they are the first developers of the water resources, and so they demand that international law be applied, that in fact they have international law. Very few Iraqis understand that the demands of Iraq, or the belief in Iraq that international law is with them, is very few understand the details. and understand that, in fact, Turkey is complying with the letter of the law, despite the fact that they have not signed on international treaties. What I have been advocating, ladies and gentlemen, is that it is now time, or it is time to think or to change the discussion between Iraq and Turkey initially, Iraq, Turkey, Syria, and Iran later, from whose water this is to how we can cooperate. One of the ideas that I have been advocating since 2009, 2008, is the idea of Mosul Dam. Mosul Dam is the most dangerous dam in the world. And regardless of how much money Iraq is going to spend on maintaining its foundation, that is not going to become a safe dam. So I submit to the Iraqis the idea that, in fact, it might be a good opportunity to lease Eliso, empty the reservoir of Mosul so that, in fact, we can fix the dam without dealing with the hydrostatic pressure, and create in the process a nucleus of cooperation and implementation of the idea that Turkish infrastructure can be leased for a certain amount, so that Iraq and Turkey can manage together the operational rules of Mosul, of Eliso Dam, and thus negating the need for keeping Mosul Reservoir in operation. First of all, to repair Mosul, but most importantly, in the future, I am trying to build a piece of brick for in a future where Iraq and Turkey can cooperate on the management of the water of the Tigris and Euphrates together. Why do I say that? I say that because not only Mosul Dam is dangerous, but also Mosul Dam Reservoir is about 340 kilometers in size. Multiply that by 3 meters, you lose 750 million cubic meters a year from Mosul Dam Reservoir. And I'm not counting how much water goes into percolation and goes into the groundwater. I'm just talking about straight up water that goes into the skies as evaporation. This is this amount of water can potentially buy us another year of irrigation in southern Iraq. Add to that, if we in fact are successful in creating the bridge between Turkey and Iraq on management of water together for the benefit of the two people, is that we have the Tartar depression. The Tartar depression, and I'll go back. I need to go back in the presentation to the beginning, and I don't know how to do that on iPad. So let me go back and do this. This depression here between the Tigris and Euphrates is 2,800 square kilometers in size. From that depression alone, we lose 7.5 billion cubic meters of water to evaporation. Let me repeat that. 7.5 billion cubic meters. Add to that, Mosul Dam is 750 million. Add to that all the other infrastructure of Iraq that was built for flood control, not for management of limited water resources. We can actually save about 8.5 billion cubic meters with one signature that allows for Iraq and Turkey to work together, for Iraq to lease storage space in Turkish dams to store Iraqi water in the Turkish dams and come to an operational agreement with Turkey on the dams so that we manage the water together to satisfy the needs of Iraq as well as Turkey. How can that be done? Well, the solutions are easy. I will say to you that once we get Iraq and Turkey to sit at the table and negotiate the price of lease, the game is done. The game is won. Why do I say that? Because at that time, we have moved the discussion from whose water this is, which cannot be resolved, to how can we operate together. A similar dynamic occurred between Germany and France in 1950 when the two countries created a coordination committee on the management of steel and coal in May of 1950, 5 years after the end of World War II. 7 years later, that became the Steel and Coal Union for 6 countries that were killing each other 12 years earlier in World War II. I'm not claiming that by taking this idea and implementing between Turkey and Iraq, we're going to end up with a borderless Middle East. But what I'm saying here is that this crisis, and it's not a crisis, this bankruptcy that is facing Iraq can be converted into an opportunity to create integration, codependency, call it what you will, built on top of the management of water together. Now, the cost of leasing, by the way, can be paid in several ways. The cost of leasing can be paid in subsidized gas that reaches Istanbul, in subsidized oil that reaches Istanbul. And if in fact, if I can get gas to Istanbul and subsidize it, I will be able to reach the European Union with 160 kilometers of additional pipe. In other words, I'm opening for Iraq a new, not just Iraq, Qatar, Iraq, Saudi, Iraq, and Iran to export their gas all the way to Eastern Europe. And that is intrinsically valuable given what's happening between the European Union and Russia at this point in time. I know that what I'm talking about is rather dreamy and it's difficult to do. And that's why I say, I will remind you that the political will to execute on my ideas, on these ideas, is not there at the leadership position. There were two people that I had in the previous government that believed in these ideas, namely Ali Allawi and Barham Saleh. We lost both of them. But that does not mean that the ideas are meaningless. The ideas are still valuable. The ideas are still possible to implement once the crisis reaches limits. Another possible way of paying for the leasing rights is that what we can tell Turkey is that they can use the Iraqi infrastructure to reach the Gulf, and therefore you can open a dry canal of a sort to bring in. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and start talking because I'm reaching the end of my time, but I want to finish the thought on how to create the cooperation between Turkey and Iraq. We said first that we can buy electricity and pay for the leasing by sending subsidized gas and subsidized oil to Istanbul. We can also buy electricity from the gas project. Turkey loses about 40% of the electricity tariff that is generated in the gas project due to transportation losses and illegal taps. By selling electricity to Iraq, they can make immediately 35% profit because the amount of losses are a lot less by transferring the electricity to Iraq. Iraq, of course, is in need of electricity and is going to need electricity for quite some time. And I'm not, well, we can talk about these issues a little bit later with the question and answer. Another way that you can create that economic integration is by opening the Gulf market to Turkish goods, Turkish vegetables, Turkish industry. And the trucks that can come in loaded with Turkish goods need not go back empty-handed. They can be loaded with containers that are unloaded in Kuwait or unloaded in Qatar or wherever in Dubai. And then you can create a two-way transportation between Eastern Europe on one hand and the Gulf, cutting the time of freight around Africa by at least 2 months for goods to reach Poland. That's another way of subsidizing. Another way that we can make this agreement stick is by bringing Turkish farming companies to invest in southern Iraq. That way, they are in the benefit, and it's in their benefit to actually allow more water to come in. And I haven't talked about modernization, irrigation, and all of that. There's a lot of things that can be done in order to enhance this. But I'm talking about just general relationships at this point in time, because that is what your interests are. There is, of course, a lot Iraq can do internally to reduce the wastage and to reduce or to reuse the water from sewage and what have you. One more final thought. I will take you to a future in which southern Iran, northern Kuwait, and northern Saudi Arabia are loaded with forests of photovoltaic cells. As the world pushes away from oil, the entire infrastructure that's undergirding the economy of this region is in danger, because in fact we are dependent on selling oil to pay for services and goods. So what we need to do is replace this source of income. And what I'm suggesting is that what we can do is send electricity from photovoltaic cells all the way to Turkey, and from Turkey to the European Union, if in fact we have extra, and we will have extra, at least seasonably. The electricity that cannot be sold can be converted to green hydrogen from the Gulf water. And the green hydrogen can become a temporal storage medium in which we can also expand. All of these ideas, by the way, have been accepted in principle by the Iraqi government, of the previous Iraqi government, as the basis for strategic development of the economy of Iraq in the next 10 years. However, as you know, unfortunately, we have lost Barham and lost Ali Alawi, so I'm not sure how we're going to make that into motivation. I am going to Iraq in the beginning of the year to talk to the Minister of Water Resources and to talk to Prime Minister Soudani to see if, in fact, we are going to continue on the path of creating the green paper that was envisioned by the committee that was formed by the Iraqi government to study the Mesopotamian revitalization initiative that President Barham presented to the government. With that, I think I yield, and I know you're going to have a ton of questions that will flesh out the ideas even more. Needless to say, I understand that I am asking for huge suspension of belief, as it were, because I know that Iran is going to be against these ideas. I know that Russia is going to be against these ideas. There's all sorts of dynamics that are happening that do not allow for this development to happen. With that said, I know that bankruptcy is happening, bankruptcy is coming, and the opportunity for implementing these ideas is gonna happen sooner or later. So, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for this very interesting presentation, and also like especially the shift that you suggest for the shift of perspective or narrative from whose water this is to how we can cooperate. I think that's really enlightening. So we already have a few questions and comments. Maybe we can start.
Let me see.
There are two questions that are kind of related. So the last one, is there a national strategy to address water-related issues at various levels by the government? For instance, increasing water use efficiency, regional collaboration, IWRM, and if there is such a strategy, what are the key milestones to be achieved in a certain period? And if not, what could be done and how the donor community can support that? So that's a bit related to the first question. When will there be a mandatory resolution to share water quantity, especially to protect natural property like Ahwa in south of Iraq? So maybe you can just explain a bit the legislative and institutional framework related to water management in Iraq and what are the key milestones?
So I was part of the strategic water and land resources study that was promulgated between 2012 and 2015. And there is a strategy. The strategy, in fact, predicts that the gap between supply and demand will be about 11 billion cubic meters by 2035. That's in 13 years. Guess what? The gap has already occurred. The strategic study envisioned approximately 800 billion worth of developments and spending to improve the infrastructure of water management in Iraq. And it said that if we don't implement by 2018, or if we don't begin implementing by 2018, it will be too late. We are now 2022. It's been 7 years since the study has been published. I'm sad to say that nothing has been implemented. Why? Well, 2014, so Daesh, money went towards fighting Daesh. oil crisis. Oil prices went down. In fact, the Iraqi government was hardly able to pay for salaries. You all know that Iraq, in principle, in theory is free market, but in reality, it's a social system. Everybody waits for a government job. The private sector is non-existent, and if it exists, it's basically dependent on oil, on government spending from oil income. So I'm sad to say that, in fact, nothing has been done on the strategic study. In fact, the strategic study stipulates that in case of a dry year, the government will undertake to preserve 25% of the marshes as refuge. They failed to comply with their own requirements. Unfortunately, Iraq is not systematic. Iraq is dependent on whose minister is. The current minister is a friend of mine, and he loves the marshes. So now we're having a lot of interest in the marshes. The previous minister is a dam guy. His solution for every problem is to build dams. The strategic study. Anyway, I don't want to berate. You all understand the difficulties in Iraq. Majority of the people are not even aware of what we are talking about. You know, when I talk about climate change, they think I'm dreaming. You know, I'm talking about something that happens 20 years from now. And I have been watching this. I have been facing this since the first time I talked about water shortages back in 2004. But I'm not going to let this stop me. The solutions have to be ready, in fact, so that when the crisis happens, and the political will materializes, we have solutions. The time to do the studies, the time to do the principal agreement is now, okay? And so when the crisis happens, then you don't need political confidence to do it. You're forced by it, and you'll do it. Mind you, any rapprochement between Baghdad and Ankara is viewed negatively by Tehran and the Shia parties that consider themselves or consider Iran their strategic depth. So not only am I talking here resistance from the bureaucrats, but also there is resistance from the politicians. But the crisis is happening. Today, Iraqis are walking to cross the Tigris by foot. It's now. It's happening. It's going to be only worse. Yes, once Aliso is filled, we're going to have a little bit more water in the Tigris, and we'll have maybe 5 years of breathing space, and then the crisis will happen. We need to work now. What are the other questions? Let's see.
So we have one that's a bit related to your last statement. Maybe we can take that one, and then I will unmute. There is an attendee who wants to ask the question directly. So has Iraq suggested the idea of the joint management of the water in Tigris with Turkey, specifically to fix the Mosul Dam?
Okay, so could you repeat the question? So Iraq
Yes.
is just an idea of joint management of water in Tigris. Has Iraq? No. The answer is no. No, the answer is no. The answer is when I talk this way to people in private, they tell me great ideas, fabulous ideas, but nobody has the, what's the word? I want to say guts. I want to say courage to say it. Unfortunately, there is no, but you hear people proclaiming that Iraq has to take Turkey and Iran to the international court so that it gets its rights. You will be surprised at how little Iraqi politicians understand about international law. They really do not understand that, in fact, Turkey is complying, Iran is not. If Iraq has a chance to win, it would be in a case against Iran. But who's going to bring a case against Iran? Oh, let's assume for the sake of argument that, in fact, Iran agrees to arbitration in The Hague, which is not, it's not possible. But let's agree that, in fact, we're going to have an arbitration in front of The Hague. And let's agree furthermore that Iraq will be able to get a judgment in its side, because Iran is obviously violating international law. How do you propose Iraq enforces the decision of The Hague? What goes to the United Nations, goes to the Security Council, submits a request for resolution. Okay, fine. Iran now is a bad list, and we'll add one more resolution against Iran. so what? It's not going to bring in water. And I submit to you, those of you, or when I tell Iraqis about the futility of thinking that international law is the route to go, I submit to them that, hey, look at the Palestinian cause. How many resolutions from the Security Council have been issued regarding the Palestinian cause? And how many have been implemented? Okay, so that's when I came up with the idea that we need to change the dialogue from whose water this is, because it's a useless route, to finding cooperation. And this, look, I am willing to hear anybody else that has better ideas. I submit to you that when the crisis happens, this is the only road that is possible to solve the crisis without war. Of course, there is war. We can always use war. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. Also, if anyone has other ideas to suggest, we welcome them. So now let me unmute. So Ali Shaukat, so you can ask your question directly. You should now be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for this great conference, and also thanks for the doctor for this great presentation. However, I'm very happy that you mentioned if there are better solutions. I do believe that the best solution is always to keep our own water within our borders. What you mentioned is that we can lease the dam of Ilisu or any dam in Turkey. However, there is no clear future plans of Turkey about this lease contract. Maybe in future they will use it against us for some political how can I say, pressure. So we always keep our sources within our border is better. For better solutions, you mentioned that the issue we have is the evaporation. We have a very high evaporation. While to stop this evaporation and get the water from their borders doesn't mean that they won't have evaporation. It will be less because the environment there is less hot. However, we can stop the evaporation within our borders by, as you mentioned, we need to change the source of electricity. What we can do is we can do floating solar panels on our reservoirs that will cost far way less than this contract, and will stop evaporation and still keep our water there. However, you also discussed about regular flow, which is always our issue, whether we will have regular flow from outside of the country or no. In this case, if we pay them with different ways about gas, you mentioned buying their vegetables, buying their electricity, all this stuff, we are paying them lots of resources only to get regular flow. However, the flow is something natural. If there is water, no matter how much dams they have no way but to release it, otherwise their dams will be flooded. So there are two issues here, whether our water issue is environmental or is it regulating it by other countries. If it is environmental, so no matter if we lease the reservoirs or we don't, we still won't have water because the climate change is reducing water. If the other option is correct, if the environment is not changing in average, the water is the same, the pattern is changing. So some years we are dry, some years we have lots of flood. Then again, we go to the same point that water is there, the pattern is changing, we need reservoirs. We need to store this water for longer periods. In this case, instead of leasing dams in Turkey, we better build new dams in Iraq and cover them with solar panels. This will stop evaporation. This will add lots of electricity for us and also still keep our resources within ourselves instead of tying ourselves with contracts with upstream countries that are always not in favor of us. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for this
question. May I answer them one by one or okay, sorry, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say thanks a lot for this question and handing over to you.
Okay. Evaporation rates in Iraq are now 3 meters per annum. With increased temperatures, they will increase to 3.5. Reservoirs in Iraq are shallow, and therefore the surface area is very wide. I wonder if you had done the calculation of how much the floating panels will cost. versus how much electricity they will generate. The idea was, in fact, presented as part of the Mesopotamian Revitalization Initiative. And in fact, nobody is stopping Iraq from doing all it can do in order to reduce the amount of losses and improve and modernize irrigation. I submit to you that, I think the name was Mr. Shaukat. I submit to you that Iraq does not have the money to implement what you are suggesting. If in fact it has it, wonderful, fantastic. Nobody is stopping Iraq from doing it. Let's do it. Let's start. Now, the point is Turkey is already losing from evaporation. The storage of Iraqi water in Turkey is not going to increase the evaporation. Turkish dams are in the mountains, therefore they are deep. The surface area is very much smaller than the surface area of reservoirs in Iraq. And in fact, evaporation in Turkey is about 0.5 meter to 0.7 meters per year. And therefore, in fact, we are going to save or make 8.5 billion cubic meters appear that we now evaporate. Now, you say that, in fact, we are submitting ourselves to strategic stronghold of Turkey. Sir, I submit to you that, in fact, Turkey already can shut off the water to Iraq by 3 years. Yes, the reservoirs will be filled eventually, but you know what? They can also divert the water to, as they intend with Jezra Dam, divert the water with tunnels to areas where they can use it for irrigation. In other words, if they really intend not to comply with international law, they can do it now. The country that is not complying with international law is, in fact, Iran. And I'm not saying Iran is bad people. Iran has 80 million people, and they are the same weather pattern as we do right now. If I was Iranian, I would take all the water of the Tigris that, in fact, going to Iraq and divert it for my use. We used to get 15 billion cubic meters a year from Iran. We get 0 today. We only get water during the spring if, in fact, there are rains that are on the sides of the mountains that cannot be contained by dams. Number 3. There's evaporation. I addressed the floating, moving water about. We lose a lot of water in canals that are unlined, that meander. The Iraqi farmer uses a lot of water because, in fact, he has 8,000 years of flood. The culture of Iraq has not changed. It takes a lot more than 1 generation or 2 generations to change the culture of irrigation. Look to your east, to your west, and look at Jordan and what they do with drip irrigation. And in fact, they're exporting vegetables, which in fact are virtual water, and their budget of water is less than what we evaporate from the Tharthar depression. So we can talk in theory about all we want about how much Iraq can do in order to depend on its own water. I have heard also, in addition to what you have mentioned, I have also heard people advocating the use of groundwater, as if our groundwater is sweet. The groundwater, by definition, has high salinity. And I submit to you that you should look at satellite pictures of Kirkuk area and areas to the north of Baghdad, which traditionally were rain-fed agriculture, i.e. never salinated because they're using rain to irrigate. And over the past 50 years, they have been using groundwater to irrigate. And what happened, of course, is that the groundwater has salt, and the salt basically those lands that have been irrigated have been abandoned because of Daesh, as well as because of salination and decrease in production. And these lands that used to have their soil put down by the natural root system are now contributing to the dust storms that we see some increasing in the area. And then in addition, the groundwater that is replenishable, i.e. recharged every year, is no more than 5 billion cubic meters per annum. And therefore, your usage should have a lot more, you should use less of that irrigation. At any rate, I am not stopping Iraqis from improving their infrastructure. Go right ahead, do it. Spend all the money. In fact, I would love for the Iraqi budget of the Ministry of Water Resources, the Ministry of Agriculture, to be double that of the Ministry of Defense. And that would make the problem even smaller than it will be in 2035. Go right ahead, do it, and I will be supporting. In fact, I am starting a project with the United Nations in southern Iraq in the next month to introduce smart agricultural beds that will lose evaporation only from the plants themselves and not from the soil. These are all expensive methods. They are going, I mean, no Iraqi will be willing to pay more than, heck, $1 for a kilogram of tomato. All the modern methods of agriculture will bring in for them to make a difference. The cost will have to be $3 and $4 dollars a kilo. That's not going to happen anytime soon. But it doesn't mean that we stop. Sure, we are going to introduce smart agricultural methods that will reduce water. In fact, we are reusing sewage water. Iraq right now dumps 5 million cubic meters of sewage water in the Tigris and Euphrates. In fact, it has been dumping sewage water in the Tigris and Euphrates for eternity. But before then, dilution was the solution to pollution. Today, we don't have the same dilution. And as a result, we have fish kills in the summer when the water flow is low, when the temperature of the water is high. And in fact, when that coincides with the ziyara to Karbala, we definitely always have fish kills because of the increased demand on oxygen, dissolved oxygen in the water. And I think I have answered all of your questions and basically, in essence, told you, okay, these are all great ideas, implement. Meanwhile, the bankruptcy is happening. What are you going to do when the bankruptcy happens?
Thanks a lot for this detailed answer. So now let me take a comment and a question. So we had another comment related a bit on this national policies that Iraq will have related to water management, which focus on rainwater, actually. So the person said, despite droughts and climate change, rains keep falling every winter. Mountains are like water towers and attract much more rain and snow. Good policies to capitalize rainwater, for example, by managing and storing it in the wadis, can make a big difference, especially in areas where river flows and groundwater are disappearing. So that wasn't really a question, but more a comment on rainwater policy.
These will only recharge the groundwater and the rest will be evaporated. I'm not against it, fine. Small dams are good and they are much better than large dams. But we have enough storage capacity in Iraq. We don't need more storage capacity. These kind of solutions are basically, in essence, because we don't want to deal with the hard question of Turkey, the relationship with Turkey. Mm-hmm. By the way, the issue of leasing dams in Turkish lands, that's not my idea. I wish I was that smart. This idea, actually, I found it by reading the Iraqi-Turkish Friendship Treaty from 1947. That treaty, chapter 4 of it, gives Iraq the right to build dams on the headwaters of the Euphrates and the Tigris with funding from Iraq for the benefit of Turkey and Iraq. Remember, the 40s, Turkey was weak, did not have money. Iraq had oil. Iraq was developing infrastructure. And at the time, Iraq had no way of protecting the towns on the Euphrates from flooding. And the only place you can build a dam that protects southern Iraq from flooding was by putting a dam in Turkey. And that was the goal of Nouri Said. Unfortunately, that idea was not implemented because Iraq was busy building Dokan and Darbandi Khan and other infrastructure. And then we had the 1958 coup, which abrogated the Friendship Treaty. The idea is not new. All we're talking about is reigniting the idea.
Thank you. Now we have a question on climate change migration. So could you say something on the climate change induced migration in the southern of Iraq?
It already began. This past summer, unfortunately, we had over 50,000 people who are dependent on water buffalo and reed harvesting as well as fishing from the marshes, moved from the marshes to cities to find ways of making a living. The response of the government of Basra unfortunately, was to stop issuing residency card for new migrants. And so imagine, if you will, you're a father of 10 and you cannot provide food from harvesting natural resources to your children. What are your options? And you only know barely how to read and write. Maybe you don't even know how to read and write. What are your options? You go work as a manual laborer. You can't find jobs. You want to feed your children. And somebody comes in, offers you a job as a security or a militiaman. So you take it. You do what you need to do in order to feed your children. And if you can't have that, then the next step is insecurity. So the effects are already beginning. Now, I'm talking about the marshes. Let's talk about agriculture. As agricultural land become highly salient, and in fact, decreased in productivity, people are abandoning it, or will abandon even more, and move to the cities looking for jobs. The same dynamic is going to happen as a result of that I have just described with the Marsh Arabs. And if they can't find, and by the way, what happens, there'll be an interesting comparison between us and Syria of the 2009 through their civil war, as well as maybe in the 1990s when Russia became unstable and insecure. A lot of the middle class picked up and left because life was untenable. And that facilitated the growth of support for for a strongman like Putin to come in and kind of bring things back to order. So you're gonna, if unaddressed, if these situations are unaddressed, and in fact Iraq's finances become unstable as a result of the world abandoning oil, and there is nothing to replace oil income, you are going to have, by virtue of the same dynamics, a huge immigration wave. Now, Iraqis educated in the 1970s and 1980s and maybe even 1990s might have made a good immigrant source for countries that are looking for immigrants to populate their lands. I submit to you that the educational level in Iraq over the past 20 years have deteriorated. So the immigrants are not going to have much skills. And I bet you, I will give you my bottom dollar, I'll bet you that these immigrants are not going to be heading to, I don't know, India or China for work opportunities. They're going to be heading to Europe. A preview happened in Belarus last summer. Last summer, or maybe it was the summer before, when you had a wave of Iraqi immigrants and Syrian immigrants trying to get to Poland. So unaddressed, Iraq is going to become a source for a big migration wave. I don't know whether the world wants to deal with it or not. I mean, the world is unable to deal with the migration waves that we have right now. And so I would submit to you that it is in everybody's benefit to help Iraq find a bridge towards an economic independence, well, not independence, you're not going to be independent of oil income. Create an income parallel and supportive, a green parallel and supportive economy to the oil economy. And I suggest to you that the photovoltaic and green hydrogen is possibly the easiest, the most robust, the most possible way of making an income stream that is supportive of the population of this area.
Thanks a lot. So we have another question. We mainly discussed Turkey so far, but you mentioned Iran several times. And there is a question. Yes, what opportunity for collaboration do you see?
Okay, all right, okay. So I sat down with a previous vice president of environmental issues in Iran. His name is Kaveh Madani, and I suggest that you also, if you're interested in issues in Iran, to reach out to him. He's a fantastic person to talk to. And he basically told me, look, Azzam, you're not going to be able to get to your goal unless you bring in Iran in this. And we sat down and talked about how to bring in Iran. As I said, Iran has the same problem as Iraq, maybe even worse, because they don't have the Euphrates. They have the headwaters of the Tigris, and they're moving the waters of the Tigris, all of it. We used to get 15 billion cubic meters from Karkha. Karkha and Karun and Zab, lower Zab resources, Serwan and what have you. They have Lake Urmia. Lake Urmia has been depleted the same way as the Ural Sea was depleted for cotton farming and what have you. There is Lake Van, or Lake Van as written. It's Lake Van in Turkey that has a salinity of about 20,000 parts per million. And it is about 600 meters, if memory serves me right, yeah, 600 meters in height difference between Urmia Lake and Lake Van, okay? And about a distance of 160 kilometers as the crow flies. Now here's an idea for you. If we connect Lake Van to Iran using a pipe similar to the red to dead idea. I know this is expensive. I know this is way out there. But the idea here is to create economic bonds. We can recover the cost of the pipeline by installing hydroelectric pumps every 70 meters difference in height. And maybe over 100 years, you can pay for the cost of that pipe. But here, what we're trying to do is create cooperation on one of the columns, one of the 4 columns of international law. International law is based on 4 columns: do no harm, equitable sharing of waters, navigational issues, and then there is environmental flows. Environmental flows is a potential column that we can use to create agreement between Iran, Turkey, and Iraq, and maybe Syria, on the management of the water resources for the benefit of the marshes, as well as the benefit of Lake Urmia. Here is the idea. In a future where we have trust, and I know that Muflih wrote that, and I want to address that issue. If we can create an agreement in the environmental column of international law, to potentially what we can do is in late winter, we would know what the snowpack is, how much water is to be expected that goes into the reservoirs. And at that point in time, we can agree with Turkey on releasing water from Turkish dams in proportion to how much water is expected to be replenished, and direct that water for environmental issues, namely to the marshes, creating a mechanical pulse of flood, a weak one, but creating a mechanical pulse of flood for the benefit of the marshes, to return that drumbeat weekly, but a weak drumbeat, to promote the biodiversity that dependent on this flood in southern Iraq. So this requires a lot of cooperation. And if you want to talk about details, I can go with you to details, because I have gone through that. The idea here is that in the future we have an electrical utility, an electrical market, in which every electrical plant, be it a photovoltaic plant or a hydroelectric plant or a thermal plant, in Iraq as well as in Turkey and in Iran, create a market together to sell electricity to a common grid, similar to the Texas system that exists today, maybe with some sort of price caps. That will make a profit point for every factory or unit that generates electricity in a free floating market, and have these units be co-owned, public-private partnerships that kind of gives it independence from the government and kind of slowly shifts the power management to the private sector, maybe with a public oversight. That way, you create an electrical utility, maybe major companies that provide electricity, or at least transport, and then you have a separate entity that controls the transportation corridor. And that transportation corridor is part of the dry canal that connects Abadan, Kuwait, Dubai, Qatar, all the way to Istanbul, and from Istanbul to Europe. Anyway, all of these ideas are in need of fleshing out, are in need of economic models so that the politicians on all sides can come to, when the conditions are ripe for such an agreement, the solutions are presented to them on a plate of gold.
Thank you. We now have a question from an attendee directly. So Mufle Alalawin, I unmute you, so I let you ask your question, Mufle.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I would like
Yep.
first to thank my friend Azzam for this is very excellent and informative really presentation. Thank you so much. And as you just mentioned, all this bring me back to the question or the point that you have just mentioned, the trust. There are a lot of good ideas when there is a trust, but the problem, what we are noticing in our region, the trust is not in place yet. And this is one of the key challenges among all the riparian countries. Imagine still there is no any data exchange between these riparian countries. And, they have this narrative, which is the water competition narrative when they come to the negotiation. And they have not yet actually considered this is a water as a key for sustainable development or to discuss and change the narrative of negotiation from water competition toward shared benefits approach. And I think this is still a very challenging, let's say, pillar when it comes to negotiation, because what would be the interest of the upstream country to release water if we will continue discussing only the amount and the location of the water? And I like your idea when you link it with the economic development. But this is actually one of the key challenges. I would like just to know from your point of view as an expert in this region, how we can reach this trust. And there's a lot of project now actually on hold, like Red Dead Canal, other due to the trust. It's not due to those not have some benefits for this country. It's a political issue. And this is the key challenges, to be frank with you, how to bridge the gap between the technician and the politician when it's come to the transboundary water management. Over to you, my friend.
I cannot disagree with you on anything you said. I'm very cognizant of the problems. I will say, however, that technology, okay, so we need to move away from trust to economic benefits. And that's the whole basis behind the idea. No trust is needed. What is needed is economic benefits. This is why I want agricultural companies of Turkey to come and work in southern Iraq, so that they have an incentive to influence their government to keep the water coming. That's number one. Number two, they cut off water, we cut off electricity. Remember, today electricity is gas and oil. Tomorrow in the future is going to be green gas and photovoltaic. Hydroelectric is great at night. And so we have actually a potential for cooperation and fully charge the electrical grid at night by hydroelectric, as well as photovoltaic, sorry, not photovoltaic, but hydrogen cell generated electricity. And therefore, then there's going to be equal influence. I repeat, now, Turkey is on record saying to Iraq that they are willing to discuss with Iraq. Well, previously, about 5 years ago, they used to say 705 cubic meters per second on average on the Tigris and Euphrates. Iraq keeps on saying that the Tigris is different than the Euphrates. They're two separate basins. Turkey wants to consider them one basin for strategic reason, because the amount of water that comes in from the Tigris from their land is not usable, and they want to consider them one basin. But these are technical issues. Where we are, what they used to say is 705 cubic meters per second on average. Iraq says, no, we need 1,400 cubic meters per second. And as you correctly point out, there's no changing. Turkey says, well, we have provided you 1,000 cubic meters per second. Iraq says, no, we don't have that. We have less than that. And everybody is playing with bluff poker. Nobody wants to share information. I'm happy to tell you that I think yesterday or maybe today, I haven't checked the news. The SWAT satellite is coming up, and that's the first satellite that the United States NASA has put dedicated for water monitoring. And we will be able to get daily, detailed analysis of how much water there is in every one of our dams, every 90 minutes, I believe. And so this technology is developing where, in fact, we don't need the Turkish word for how much water there is, or the Iraqi word for how much water they received, right? We need to have calibration data, and we need to have ground truthing and all of that. And I'm working with the University of Washington on creating teams that can collect data independent of government on water quality as well as water quantity. But that's a long list of stuff that needs to be done. And of course, there are those that do not want this data to be shared. Okay. What was it that Reagan said? Trust but verify, right? What we are developing here is the verification tool, and the trust will come hopefully as a result of economic mutual interests. Will that happen? There's no other alternative.
Thanks a lot for this really interesting answer on how to actually build the trust via economic relations. We are already at the end of our time, so it's 10:30 Swiss time, so we will soon have to close the session. You were able to tackle a lot of questions, so thanks a lot for that. I will.
Let me address your grouping with one more idea.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Okay, so I have presented you large ideas, and I have been contemplating the position of those who do not want to come to an agreement with Turkey or are cynical about the Turkish position. And I just answered you, the only other answer is war. Well, there is another answer. I wasn't very truthful. There is the answer that Ali Shaukat wants to hear, that we develop our own dependence on our own water resources. And that's the groundwater, as well as the limited water of Kurdistan. There's a difficulty there is a similar dynamic between the KRG and Baghdad that exists between Baghdad and Ankara. So if I were you, I would challenge me to begin implementing these ideas by creating an agreement between the KRG and Baghdad, between Erbil and Baghdad, on the management of water resources along the same lines that I am advocating for Turkey and Baghdad. And this is my new thinking over the past 6 months. And there's nothing that stops us from implementing these ideas in between Erbil and Baghdad. That's number one. Number two, the idea of smart irrigation and smart agriculture is very much viable, because in fact, we will be saving 80 to 90% of the water. So in fact, we can potentially depend on our own water resources if it's not saline. And so I am beginning to think along those lines to find solutions, but I realize then it would be about food security, not about Iraq being the breadbasket. Previously, I wanted to see in Iraq, or I still want to see Iraq becoming the breadbasket of the region, similar to how it was in the past. Iraq's value to this area is that it's the breadbasket as well as the link, an international link in the trade north and south, east and west. And of course, over the past 60 years, we had oil. And what I wanted to do is to bring back the history of being a breadbasket, the trade linkage, and add on that sustainable energy. But if we become divided, which is a potential output of the current instability in Iraq, that we are divided into 3 different nations, is that the end? I submit to you, it is not, because this area is eternal and will continue to exist. We need to come up with more ideas on how to keep the people attached to this land. And that's where I'm going next. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Azzam Alwash, for those concluding remarks. I think your optimistic point of view is really interesting, pragmatic but optimistic. So I think that's good to finish on that note. And I would like to thank you a lot for your time, for your
Thanks to
input. That was
Patri
really...
for suggesting me and allowing me the opportunity to address your group. And I love the challenging questions. They always make you think. And hopefully I have addressed the questions properly. If those want to continue the discussion, please be free to share my email address with them, and I'll be more than happy to continue the discussion forward. I submit to you that challenging my ideas is actually beneficial to me. By challenging the basis on which my ideas are, you're making me think harder and come up with solutions and answers that I have not anticipated. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So I will share your email and the recording in a follow-up email to the participants. Thanks a lot. Thank you also, Patrice. Thank you, Martin, for the IT support, and thank you all participants for your wonderful questions. So we will now close the session. So once more, thank you, Dr. Azzam Alwash, and talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Martin, I think you can